A little coffee ASMR to get us going. To be human is to suffer, okay? Very empowering message, I know. But it is, for real, okay? What you're often told when it comes to pain, injury, rehab, etc., is that you need to achieve this perfect state, this perfect ideal human being that has symmetrical muscles, symmetrical joints, their shoulders rest at the same height, their hips rest at the same height, their legs are the exact same length, they better not have any knee valgus or anything, their arches better be symmetrical. And until you achieve that you're probably going to be on the path to pain and injury. That's not very helpful. I think you can see why that's not very helpful. Because if you create this human ideal, this fictional character that has everything perfectly balanced, perfect neuromuscular timing, perfect balance between muscles, joints, etc., perfect posture supposedly, then that is an ideal, and most of us deviate from that. And that means that most of us are guaranteed to be in pain, and most of us aren't going to escape that until someone else intervenes. And this is where things get a little bit tricky, because there's significant financial reward to be gained from selling people the idea that their body requires intervention. And this is where certain rehab professionals will come in to sell you both the problem and the solution. Okay, how many of you have gone to a physiotherapist or a personal trainer or something, and you've told them, my shoulder, little bit niggly, bruh, after a few sets of bench press, it doesn't feel too good. And what comes next? What comes next is both the problem and the solution, okay? So you get a new problem created. So for example, they'll look at you and they'll say, it looks like your pelvis might be a little bit imbalanced. Damn, bruh, it's a big one. Pelvis is a little bit imbalanced. They check your leg length or something, or your arches, and suddenly you've got this additional problem that's been created. And what are you told next? You're told that, okay, this is going to take about, maybe 12 sessions to fix. We're going to need to do some manual therapy. We're going to need to do some specific exercises. And then what we're going to do is we're going to fix all these problems with your structure. And once that's fixed, you'll be free of pain. Okay, but we got to fix that first. That's done a number of things. One, it might actually put you on the path to recovery because, well, you're going to be participating in some exercise potentially. Someone has told you that you're going to get better, so maybe there's hope there. But the underlying substructure of that argument is that there's something wrong with you, and until that's corrected, you're going to be in pain. And that's clearly a recipe for suffering. And this is the position that a lot of people are in. I put up a poll on my story, or a question on my story yesterday, to let me know, what types of injuries you were struggling with, what type of pain was holding you back from training at 100%. And one of the common themes is that, well, firstly, there's kind of a spectrum. So on one side of the spectrum, you have people who say, yeah, my shoulder hurts a bit on bench, but only when I get to really heavy weights. It's not really a factor. I train anyway, it's fine. Other people will say things that come from a position of being quite defeated, low self-efficacy, low feelings of being able to do the thing, low feelings of confidence in themselves, etc. And they'll say things like, oh, I've been trying to get back to running again, but every time I try, my knee just flares up, so I've just given up and I'm going to wait until the pain goes away. And that wait approach can be useful sometimes and not so useful other times, because what you're doing is putting yourself in a position where until there is an absence of discomfort, you're not going to try and move forward with your health and fitness progress. Not a great way to live. Additionally, if someone has superimposed that argument that we mentioned, that you have to have perfect structure or whatever before you can do these things, until you found a successful intervention to correct this supposed anatomical problem that you've got, then, well, you're going to be suffering anyway. So, if you don't have the financial resources to pay for the intervention, or the intervention didn't work for you, then you're guaranteed to suffer, okay? So, with all that said, I'm making suffering sound negative. So why did I say to suffer is to be human, or to be human is to suffer? The reason I say that is because there's always going to be an element of suffering that goes along with the human experience. And that's not wiped out when we start to engage in physical training. So when you take up some form of exercise, whether it's lifting weights, it's martial arts, it's running, it's yoga, etc., there's going to be a period of time where, you have a bit of pain that doesn't seem to be going away. You might have it for 2 or 3 weeks, you might have it for 12 weeks, etc. But that's not your destiny, okay? So I want you to accept that there's going to be a baseline level of suffering that goes along with anything that you try, okay? But it doesn't mean that there's an inherent fault with you that can't be fixed or can't change, or you at least can't make some progress on. That's the key point, okay? You don't want to be destined to it. You want to accept that there's some level of suffering that's probably going to be part of this process, but you don't want to make yourself feel like there's an inherent problem with you that doesn't exist for everyone else. And that's why I put it in those terms, that to be human is to suffer, because all of us will go through this. There are some outliers who just never seem to get injured. It's just a non-issue for them. But there's also potentially a trade-off there where maybe it's because they're always holding back in training a little bit, or maybe there's something else that they're missing out on. So that's why it can be empowering to actually just remember that this is part of the process, okay? Rehab culture, fragility culture, etc. necessitates that you require intervention and dependence on someone else. If that's something that's created for years or decades, you could be spending thousands, if not tens of thousands, on interventions that are very low value, that offer you very little other than 30 minutes, maybe a couple of days of relief for your pain and as a result of your suffering. And when that suffering comes back, when that pain comes back, what happens? Again, you feel like that inherent problem with you has surfaced to the structure. And all of this is a recipe. Did I say surface to the structure? I don't know. Anyway, it's a recipe for constantly feeling like someone who just can't do whatever it is that you're trying to do. You can't live like everyone else. You get the impression that everyone else is free of suffering and that you're the only person that is in this position. And it's a difficult position to be in, okay? So first things first, like, where do you go from here? One of the best things you can do is give yourself permission to participate, okay? So if you're someone who's been in pain for a long time, this applies to you. So if you've been in pain for a long time and you've seen therapists, you've seen doctors, etc., and they've told you, oh, don't exercise, it mightn't be a good idea, wait until the pain goes away to do any exercise. It's not a good path to be on. You're losing fitness adaptations, you're compromising your health, along with not really moving forward on the pain front, okay? And the thing is, it's self-reinforcing, because if you've been told that something that you're doing is harmful and that you should do less of that thing and that your structure is the problem, then the next step from that is that if the pain isn't going away and it's persisting in your everyday life, then maybe there are things in your everyday life that are also just not appropriate for you, that you're not prepared to do. And as a result, you retreat away from normal social life as well as the physical training or the physical activity that you were trying to participate in. It might even involve your occupation, okay? And that's just not a good place to be in, okay? I'm one of on my final physio placement, I met this young lady who was coming in with neck pain. And this neck pain had bothered her for a number of years. And for sure, she was in pain and there was justified suffering along with that. But that suffering was amplified by the fact that she felt like she couldn't do the things that she wanted to be able to do. Okay, when she would go on nights out, she'd have to ensure that there was a group of lads around her that were on a night out with her to stop someone bumping into her because it might hurt her neck. And as a result, she couldn't really go on nights out unless those people were there, for example. She loved surfing, I believe it was surfing, yeah, and she couldn't surf because, well, no one had told her she could surf, and she hadn't been trying it. She hadn't gotten in the pool, she hadn't gotten in the sea, because she didn't feel she had permission to do any of these things. She felt like she needed to get rid of the pain and fix this problem with her neck before she could do anything that she actually enjoyed. And this brought a lot of suffering along with that, a lot of internalized suffering that, you know, emerged in the form of tears that day. And there are a lot of people in that position. There are a lot of people who have these, you know, the pain that they've been experiencing that hasn't really gotten better. And they feel like that's kind of the end for them because they've tried the supposed interventions that are supposed to fix this, that are supposed to fix their structure. And if those problems haven't been fixed, then as a result, the logical conclusion for anyone is that, well, that's a me problem. I'm not going to be able to move forward from this. So regardless of whether you're the GAA player who's had recurrent hamstring strains, or you're the individual who typically doesn't exercise but you've been in pain for years with your back or whatever, just recognize that there's always an entry point. There's always an entry point, and one of the key things that needs to be developed, or at least should be developed or promoted, is the concept of self-efficacy, which in layman's terms is basically me thinking that, yeah, you know, if someone presents me with a problem, I can do that, I can overcome that, that's not a problem, no factor, it's too easy, okay? That's what we want to promote. That's what I like to promote. That's what I like to get my clients to work on. Because if someone comes to me and they're saying, yeah, Gary, I can do anything, but there's no way I can do squatting. Oh, you bet we're doing squatting, okay? We're going to do that. Because if you're telling me that there's a dragon that you're not willing to face, then I want you to face the dragon, okay? It doesn't mean, excuse me, it doesn't mean you have to run and attack the dragon on day one. But what it means is that you might be able to get, you know, in the same room as the dragon initially, okay? You might get into the same room, and then eventually you walk one pace towards the dragon, and then you turn around and you leave. And then eventually you walk up to the dragon and you stare him right in the eyes, okay? Eventually you cut his head off. Done. Simple. And that's the same thing when it comes to something like a squat. If you've got knee pain, chronic knee pain, and you think that squatting is just not for you, there's no way I can do something like that. We might start with a bodyweight squat from a chair, a sit to stand, you know, a very basic exercise. See how that goes. Then it might be a little goblet squat with a 2 kilo dumbbell. It might be a goblet squat with a 20 kilo dumbbell eventually. And over time, as you expose yourself to these different tasks, you begin to develop that self-efficacy, along with obviously getting the physical adaptations to exercise. And hopefully someday, you know, you might be able to get a barbell in the front rack position, or a barbell on your back, or maybe you prefer leg pressing or whatever. But what you don't want is to write yourself off from activities. There are some rare cases where this, of course, applies. You know, like you can't do a bilateral barbell squat, for example, standing up if you've got severe neuropathy or nerve issues in your legs that don't allow you to feel the floor, and you tend to fall over. Okay, that's clearly not a great idea, you know. There are cases like that. But the vast majority of the time, most people can do these basic movements, okay? It doesn't mean they have to do them a particular way, or that it's always going to look the same, or they have to use the same weight, etc. But there's always an entry point. There's always an entry point for everyone. And that's the point I want to make clear today, is that if you're someone who's been suffering for quite a while, there's an entry point there, and the explanation that you've gotten and you've gotten your head so far, it matters, okay? Because like one of the things that we see is that there's a cultural variation, there's a significant socio-cultural factor to how people interpret pain and how they derive meaning from the pain that they experience. And pain and suffering are two different constructs, related but different, okay? And obviously everyone knows that, because if you've ever exercised and done a really hard training session and you felt some pain during the training session, your kind of your thoughts about that are, and your interpretation of that is, oh well, this is part of the exercise process, my quads are sore, that's normal, I did squats and leg press, it's actually a good thing. Okay, there's not suffering that comes from that. You know, it's not that significant. Okay, there might be a little bit of suffering when your quads are sore and you're like, oh Jesus, I want to stop the set. But it's not like having chronic low back pain, for example. Okay, and the way we interpret that does vary on that kind of socio-cultural level, as I said. You know, there's been studies done on Aboriginal Australians, for example, and as they moved from the early 1990s up to the last decade or so, what you see is that there's a change in the interpretation of pain because of moving from a more spiritual understanding of pain, for example. Like in one study, it was reported that those Aboriginal Australians who had neck pain, that was perceived to be a sign of impending doom, okay? It was seen to be far more than something biomedical or biomechanical or neurological. It was seen as something, you know, being impending doom, effectively, is how it has been described in qualitative research, at least. And that's something that clearly brings a lot of suffering with it. Okay, and that's generally what you see, is that people suffer a lot more from neck pain than they did from something like low back pain, because back pain was present in the cohort, but it wasn't as big of a deal because it didn't have that kind of spiritual significance. However, as you follow up then decades later, once that culture has been infiltrated by the typical biomedical explanations, for example, oh, you have back pain because you have, I don't know, foraminal stenosis, or you have degenerative changes, modic changes on your MRI, etc., or you got a disc bulge, disc herniation, etc. As people are infiltrated with those explanations and they're told that, you know, oh, well, we need to fix this problem before you can be out of pain, suffering increases, or at least it seems to have increased, particularly for low back pain. And that's something that anyone who works with people in pain will understand very well, that once people are, you know, freed from that a little bit, because like what we already know that, you know, many of us, if we were to get scans, if we were to get MRIs, for example, we would have changes on MRI that might be perceived as pathological, but might actually be just, you know, asymptomatic, or they might be part of the adaptive changes associated with training. Like if you get an MRI and it says, oh, there seems to be a little bit of, you know, inflammatory change, or there's a slight change in the signal or something like that in the tendon, like that can be just training related, you know. And if you're told that you need to fix this thing before pain goes away, or you've got this significant problem, it changes your interpretation, it changes the meaning and response to that pain, and as a result can modify your suffering. So with all of that said, guys, as I said, to be human is to suffer. What I want you to take away from today, because I'll have future videos on specifics, is that if you're someone who is in pain, if you're someone who's injured, if you're someone who's been told that there's no way you're going to be out of pain until you fix these specific problems, please try and free yourself from that. Please go out today and try to do something, okay? It might be that you were told you could never do a deadlift variation again because you've got, you know, again, some of those changes on the MRI of your spine. Go out and try and do something. You know, could you do a hip hinge with a broomstick? You know, could you do 3 sets of that? See if that's an appropriate entry point, and build it up. And most importantly, let me know how you get on. If you need advice about where to find your entry point, what the problem is, you need a more informed perspective, please feel free to DM me. Nothing annoys me more than seeing information that makes people suffer more than they need to, okay? Because life is hard enough, and there's going to be plenty of suffering, and we don't need to make that harder for people. I want you to feel like you can go and get after it and live a good life, and that's why we put out things like, you know, the too easy mindset, that you want to approach life like it's too easy and approach all problems and challenges and just say, fuck it, man, it's too easy, let's get after it. Because that's an empowering attitude, and that's an empowering way of overcoming these problems. So, as I said, if you need more specific advice, please reach out. Comment below if you think that someone could benefit from this video, and drop me a DM if you'd like more specific advice. So that's me. Remember that it is, in fact, too easy.